I'm Effie Parks. Welcome to Once Upon a Gene, the podcast. This is a place I created for us to connect and share the stories of our not-so-typical lives. Raising kids who are born with rare genetic syndromes and other types of disabilities can feel pretty isolating. What I know for sure is that when we can hear the triumphs and challenges from others who get it, we can find a lot more laughter, a lot more hope, and feel a lot less alone. I believe there are some magical healing powers that can happen for all of us through sharing our stories, and I'll take all the help I can get.
Once Upon a Gene is proud to be part of Bloodstream Media. Living in a family affected by rare and chronic illness can be isolating, and sometimes the best medicine is connecting to the voices of people who share your experience. This is why Bloodstream Media produces podcasts, blogs, and other forms of content for patients, families, and clinicians impacted by rare and chronic diseases. Visit bloodstreammedia.com to learn more.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. I just got back from Nashville, Tennessee, where I was so lucky and honored to attend the SYNGAP Research Fund Science and Family Conference. Thank you to Mike Graglia and to all the SYNGAPians for your generosity, your inspiration, and your loving open arms. I had so much fun. I recorded some tidbits from some of the families there and really hope to do more of these family conferences moving forward. So if you think that that would be cool for your patient advocacy group and you want me at your conference, please get in touch with me. Okay, today's guest is one of my new favorite people. And I actually got to hug her in person a couple days ago in Nashville, so that was extra special. She's a rare mom and founder of the Rory Belle Foundation in honor of her daughter, Rory Belle, who had NARS1. She's also a clinical pharmacist who is on a mission to make a difference for our kids with the specialty that she brings to the table, surrounded treating our kids with her pharmacological expertise, including advocating for palliative care for rare families. We are so lucky to have her on our team, and I have no doubt she will be front and center moving forward. So watch out, and please enjoy my conversation with Rachel Heilmann. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Effie. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. I met you not too long ago. Julia Vitarello introduced us, and I'm so grateful that she did from the moment I met you. So I'm so happy you're here, and I can't wait to have a conversation with you and get everyone else to meet you and hear about all the important work you're doing and a little bit about your story. Give us a little intro. I'd love to hear about you as a mom. I'd love to hear about little Rory.
Yeah. So, my name's Rachel Heilmann. I like to talk about myself in terms of my past life when it comes to my professional career or pre-Rory. And I think like all of us do in the rare world, there's what we did before and who we are now, and how that's actually, for me at least, has made me a better person and human and mom. And so in my past life, I was a clinical pharmacy specialist. And so I've spent almost 15 years in the clinical pharmacy world, in clinic, working with physicians and nurses and part of a care team taking care of patients, and then also in the managerial space, managing people like me who work in medical specialties alongside physicians, and mostly in the adult medicine world. But, I worked in a large healthcare organization, and, even before my daughter Rory was born, I was drawn to sort of rare disease and bridging the gap in care for these kiddos, especially as gene therapy started coming out and new therapy started coming out, and partnering with our local children's hospital here in Denver on making sure we could get them the right care when they needed it. So that's kind of my past life. My daughter, Rory Belle, was born in October of 2019, sick from the beginning, although you don't, as a mom, want to recognize that. And she was very quickly hospitalized for failure to thrive. After 3 months, started seizing actually in the hospital. And we went through a very quick diagnostic, but still hoop jumping odyssey to get her diagnosis. She was about 8 months old, diagnosed with NARS1 disease. At the time, no published literature on this disease. But we've been very fortunate to since find the researcher who's discovered the gene as being pathogenic and has really committed her career to NARS1 and moving forward with the Rory Belle Foundation, just like so many of these other moms out there and dads, to finding cures. My daughter, Rory, passed away in February of 21 from NARS1 disease, which is very typically a neurodevelopmental disease. In her case, her inheritance from myself and my husband was just too significant for her to sustain. And she died comfortably in our home with palliative care and hospice, which is exactly what we could have wished for her and wanted for her. And that's led me to here and led me to Julia and you, Effie, and combined brain now, sort of pivoting my career. And here we are. Hopefully that gives the audience an idea of my 40 years of life, basically.
Oh my gosh. I was just looking at a photo of Rory that you sent me earlier, and she was just being a cute little roly-poly baby with her middle finger out. And I love that. I love that visual for everyone. And I think that's so funny you have that picture of her. It's so sweet.
It's one of my favorite, and that's her in the hospital. So that was like right when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and her loving brother brought home a bunch of school viruses from kindergarten, and we had to go in. So she was growing 2 GI viruses and 2 respiratory viruses. None of those COVID, but she had it. I'm sitting there in my lap in the hospital in total isolation because that's the way things were then. And she was just telling me and the world, screw you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think it's a good way moving forward too. And I can tell that that's kind of what you're doing. And you said that you had like 2 lives that you've lived, but I feel like someone in your shoes probably lives a different life every morning that you wake up, especially with having a little boy in the house, and then your career and COVID, and then Rory passing away. It just seems like it probably turns over more often than not.
I don't know that that's any different for me than it is for you or anybody else out there. I think the only difference for me is like I wake up every morning like knowing that Rory's not here. And so I, move forward to make a deliberate choice to make decisions for her and to be grateful for the things that I have in front of me. And I do feel like in our community that is, the strength that binds us, and also, finds us a commonality in being able to move forward and to do the things that we do every day. And I will just say, like, for us, like the pandemic and COVID, like it was a blessing because I could work from home. And I could do my job from home, and I could still care for my daughter, and I could still have time, with her and my son with her. And I don't know if that would have been possible without it.
I've heard that from several families who have lost their kiddos during COVID. And I'm so grateful that you have that perspective. And I'm also just so soothed by the fact that making a choice, right, is something in your line of sight, and the power of choosing your story and where you're going from that and how much of a difference that can make in your day-to-day is just so important.
Yeah.
My goodness. Okay, Rachel. So let's talk about that other part of your life then. Tell us what a clinical pharmacist is.
Yeah, so a clinical pharmacist is someone who works alongside your care provider to, help improve the care for patients. And so in my space and the people that I worked with, we all were residency trained. So each of us did another year or 2 after pharmacy school to gain extra skills and insight and expertise to be able to practice, to our fullest potential and scope, and then work with our physician partners and our nursing partners in the office to administer care. Sometimes that is like just flat out managing diseases for folks. So, if you had diabetes, for instance, a clinical pharmacist might call you and manage your diabetes end to end, adjust your medications, talk to you about your diet, maybe integrate in a dietitian if you needed a little extra support, start insulin, adjust insulin, order your labs. And so that's kind of a big, broad picture of what that might look like from a really common disease state. And then the other thing, which I think is probably more applicable to our conversation today, is when your physician or provider would just get stuck on, what's the next thing that I can do for this patient, they come to us. And so I think about that often with our kiddos, because pediatric medicine doesn't have a ton of data, period, and a lot of drugs approved, and a lot of it is off label. And then when you start getting into rare disease space, it's even more sparse. And so we were kind of, the expert in saying, gosh, I just don't know what to do for this patient. We've tried, 10 different drugs for their, peripheral neuropathy, for their pain, and none of them seem to do the right thing. What's next? What else can we offer? And that's where, someone like myself would come in, look through the literature, or talk to the patient and ask them questions about what worked, what didn't work. And so we really were an extension of, what your physician or mid-level or whoever specialist that you might see is, to really take care of that single person in front of you.
You mentioned that the clinical pharmacist might be the one calling you and giving you a regimen or asking you about your stuff. But I feel like, and if any of you out there have this clinical pharmacist in your life that is active in your circle, please send me a message and let me know. But I feel like most of us parents who are raising these kiddos with rare diseases, we don't necessarily see you and we don't hear from you. And we don't know that you're going on in the background. And I wonder, how do we bring that to the forefront, and what kind of role could the clinical pharmacist play in the genetic disorder space and helping parents get the right doses, get the right meds, figure it out a little more? Because I feel like, from my personal experience, a lot of the time at my neurologist, I don't necessarily feel like she's ever thinking outside the box. I don't ever feel like she's trying to come up with a plan. I feel like we're just there. We talk about the meds that we're on, and then maybe we'll increase the dose. There isn't any sort of future planning. I don't feel like. It's kind of just, this is our appointment time, this is what we're doing, and it's not very creative.
No, I think you're actually spot on there, Effie, in your assessment. And actually, even in my experience with Rory, I felt that way, right? And this is my career and my job. I think there's a couple of factors that go into play when I think about that support. Is, one, I don't think that there is a really concentrated and diffuse focus right now in terms of rare disease and clinical pharmacy in the rare disease, or even physicians in rare disease, right? We have our experts and our centers of excellence, around the country, around the world, but, they're few in number, and we all kind of gravitate towards the same ones. And I certainly felt, in my journey, that I was the one educating physicians, just like I'm sure you do as a mom, on, what you're willing to risk for your kid and what you're willing to be creative on. And I think, again, where I've grown up in the pharmacy world and in the healthcare world, there's a hesitancy around the unknown and risk and benefit, and you hear a lot about medical legal. And so I think there sometimes is this underpinning fear from a prescriber standpoint, right, of doing harm. And I would love to see more pharmacists in this space, because I think we're willing to, dig through every crevice and find the answer to whatever the question that's being asked, and help to support, the patient, but also the physician, in providing consent and balancing benefits and risks around medication, and being able to push the envelope a little bit, because for us and our kids, that's imperative to see anything, to see the smallest things, to see, Ford saying a word, right? Or, being able to pick up, a peanut butter and jelly square or anything, right? Those things matter to us as moms and dads. and the doctors don't always get to see those things. So yeah, we need more. The world needs more of me, more of us, and a self-professional promotion. Even though that's my past life, because I do think that we can provide better care in a space that is really lacking and support.
So if there are, obviously we need more, but if they're there, how as parents do we get you on board on our team? Like, how do we bring this up to our doctors? How do we say, I know that you prescribe this medicine, but I want to dig deeper, and I want someone to who has more comprehension of all of the drugs available and what they do and how they react with each other. Like, how can we do something better? How do you get them on your team? How do you get your doctors to even agree that you're not a lunatic and you're not WebMDing everything? Because I feel like sometimes you're definitely brushed off, right? Like, you have to be kind of a maniac sometimes to get any movement. How do you kind of pique that interest in getting the clinical pharmacist on your team?
Ask. I'm in the biz, so I know that they exist right at my local children's hospital up the street. I know they're there because I know who they are. And so I think that's the most important thing is when you're going is just to say hey, do you happen to have a clinical pharmacist or clinical pharmacy specialist here? I really want to talk about maybe some alternatives, because they can refer them right directly to them, and they could ask that question for you. And you're right, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And I do think in the pharmacy world, a little bit of an unsung hero, because there's a lot that happens behind and we're not out there in front all the time. But I would just say ask, because if you are in a facility where that has sort of a specialist or multiple specialists, and you're in an urban area, you're likely going to there's likely some clinical pharmacy services available, and you just don't know it. And so I would always encourage people to ask the questions and ask their physicians. And it might be something even they aren't using, their clinical pharmacists for services for. And as you start to use them, right, that's what builds business cases. That's what builds awareness. That's how you get, additional employees, FTE, to help support this space. And so that's what I would just encourage. Just ask the question, because I hear you and I feel you, to be in front of, your physician asking questions, and right, they've got to get to their next appointment. And again, that's just the way our system is built. And there's also a hesitancy to push doses, to go outside of labeling. But in the rare disease, for me, anything goes. Anything goes.
Amen. I think all of us are here, take it. Here's all my stuff.
Yes. And I think, again, if you're not seeing somebody who, from a physician perspective, who lives rare disease, right, who, is passionate about it, right, I think, again, there's just so much in medicine that is not understood, that this is just a huge area that isn't. And so if you're not with that single expert, then yeah, you have to ask for other support. And I would just say, hey, do you have a clinical pharmacy specialist who might take a look at my meds? Or I'd really like to increase the dose of this one, or, what's the risk of me doing this? Or, that's what we're here for. I mean, I've been through 7 years of school and 2 residencies. I've got a lot of training to be able to answer those questions, and that's what I want to do. I want to give you the support and your kid the support, and the medical team the support that they need to do the right thing, to make a difference.
Lots of parents in our community have sleuthed out their own drugs that they want to try on their kids. And, Sanath and Michelle and even myself have kind of toyed with dosage and then other medications. And I know you yourself even prescribed medicine to Rory at the time.
Yep.
Yeah. And when you did that, was that you just figuring it out because that's what you do? Or were you having problems getting off-label drugs administered to Rory?
So it depended on who I was interacting with. For me, because I worked in a healthcare system and I knew her pediatricians, right? Her providers, her general providers personally and professionally, I could do it, right? I could escalate doses past the labeling. I could look stuff up and, have a dialogue and, like just put in like, here's what I would like you to prescribe for me. And I think because they knew me and, trusted me and knew that I understood the benefits and the risks of doing what I was doing, right? I had that support. I certainly, like I've heard from you and Michelle and so many others, when I would run into, someone I didn't know as well personally, I had the same battles and the same conversations, right? Specifically remember around like rescue medicines, because Rory was, a teeny tiny little peanut. And, I wanted a rescue medicine for her because her seizures were lasting, sometimes up to 8 minutes. And that's not supposed to happen, right? And so I had to fight for that. And I had to, produce protocols, and I had to call my own neurology clinical pharmacy specialist that happened to work for me and say like, hey, right, please help me with this data and this information and, how we've worked to get this in place for kids down to, this weight. And so, yeah, I've been in the same shoes as you, not to dash any hope there. But I think, I got to the point, right, where I could get some agreement and consensus. And for me, a lot of that really has to do with being armed with information and consent, right? Like you as a parent understand the risk and you understand the benefit, and you're okay with moving forward on those things, because in this case, doing nothing is more harmful than doing what you're asking to do. In no world should a 3-month-old baby's brain be rocked for 8 minutes at a time, right, every single day. That, to me, that just shouldn't happen. I don't really care what the data says or your label says.
Let's actually talk a little bit more about consent and like coming prepared and understanding treatment and also not doing treatment and what things can be leveraged.
Yeah. So consent is the golden seal of documentation in terms of balancing your risk benefits, understanding risk benefits, providing protection for a prescriber, and, I think also providing protection for you as a parent in these cases. And for me, that was one of the things that I did a lot in my job when we were really pushing the envelope on doses or, different dosage forms or, finding an N of 1, like in a case report, and trying to apply it right to that individual patient. And so I always tried to outline, for the prescriber, like, here's the benefit of doing this for this patient, right? Here's what they get by going outside of the box, right? They potentially can get better pain relief. They could potentially get their thyroid levels under control. Here's the risk of not doing that, right? You might have a small, tiny risk of, an EKG abnormality. Let's get one, right? Their potassium might drop or get too high. Let's monitor that. And so I kind of put those things together in a fashion behind the scenes so that those conversations could be had between a prescriber and a patient, so that both sides felt comfortable, right, with moving forward in a shared decision-making fashion. And so from a mom standpoint, right, coming to the table was saying like, all right, here's the information that my researcher has provided, because I do know that happens sometimes, right? You might be going through a med repurposing phase, and you can say like, right, here's the printout of, of how this drug has behaved. And sometimes there's a clinical pharmacologist involved with dosing or things, of that nature. And so you can provide that information up front, and you can say, here's the risks that I understand. What else are you concerned with, right? Sometimes it's opening the dialogue on the other side to try to get the other side to think differently, right? Because you're already there. Like as a mom, you're already there. Like, I'm going to do anything. And you're standing in front of somebody who has never seen this disease in their life and maybe will never see it again. And so it's trying to bring them closer to you. And so that somewhere you can find something in the middle and be able to do what you need to do for your kid. And so it's balancing those benefit risks and what you're willing to risk, right, as a parent and as a mom, and then trying to open that conversation for the prescriber on, where their risk is. And if it's not there, then it's say, hey, do you have a clinical pharmacy specialist or somebody on your team who might be able to look into this for me a little bit more so that we can feel more comfortable with maybe moving forward, or what other alternatives there might be? And that's kind of how I think about consent. It's a balance and a compromise.
Yeah. And it's kind of like that first step to getting the rest of the world to understand like meaningful endpoints to you and your family, right?
Yes.
I think about all the stuff that you just said in like figuring out what medicines to try and what dosages to do and like what plan of action and like all of the side effects that could happen and all of the benefits. And then all I think about is time. Like, how much time would that take you on your end if you're getting patient after patient? I mean, granted, most aren't going to need like complex care coordination, but like that seems like it would take so long, but maybe you're so smart and so good at it that it doesn't take that kind of time to like do it case by case. But how is that efficient? And also, do we want it to necessarily be efficient because we want it to be tailored to our kids? But how does that really come in practice, like realistically?
Actually, that's a really great question. So it can be time consuming, especially the first time you do it, for sure. And I'm not going to say like, that every rare disease, right, is the same, because it's not. But there's also a lot of commonalities, right? When we start thinking about neurodevelopmental diseases, and how they present. And, there's a lot that has to do with speaking and not being able to speak, or not having, a recognizable speech or movement, or even like the medicines that I hear about that like your kiddo's taking, like I recognize those as similar medicines that I've heard, in NARS 1 that our kiddos are taking. And so, from an efficiency standpoint, like I think about those things and I try to make the connections, right? And so if you have a clinical pharmacy specialist on your team, right, they're seeing all of those things, right? Your physician may not necessarily be. But if you have somebody who is seeing, all your rare disease patients, right, or, the really challenging ones, or, sleuthing out literature, they're funneling to that person. And so that person does get efficient in it, and they're able to draw and pull things, right, from other disease states and other similarities that might be, you might be able to find some commonalities too, in order to drive some meaningful outcomes. So the first time it comes, yeah, it's like a few hours. I would definitely say I have spent 2-3 hours sometimes on like a single patient case. But once you spend the 2 or 3 hours on it, right, the next one is like, 2 hours, and then maybe it's an hour and a half. And then maybe, by the time you get to 3 or 4, it stops being so rare. And I think, right, that I've heard Julia talk about this, like we're not really rare, right? We're rare as individuals, but from a prevalence standpoint, there's so many of us. And so that's what I have always tried to do in my practice, is find the link. And once you can find the link, right, it makes it a lot easier every single time.
Yeah, basically creating a standard of care because it's happening and it's being implemented. Yeah. So how do we create awareness around this? How do we make this kind of a standard of care for our families? Who do we get the support from? How do we get these conversations started? Because it can't just be parents grinding in every area of their life, including being on the internet all night and asking people what meds they're using and how they're using it, and then bringing it back to the doctor every 3 months, maybe if they're lucky enough to get that appointment. How do we kind of fix this system or bridge the gap a little bit into making this more manageable and actually like working for our families?
Effie, why do you ask such hard questions on a Saturday?
They seem so broken and messy because like I'm trying to figure this out, and I'm so new to like the clinical pharmacist stuff, but I have been thinking about it for a couple months in like, why don't we have these people on like our advisory boards for our patient advocacy groups? Like we need pharmacists on our board.
I agree with that. Amber Freed, who I'm sure you know, I've connected with her because she lives in the area, and I noticed she has one on her board of pharmacy. And I told her, I was like, so like it's really one of the first ones that I had seen, and I said I was really proud of her for including her, as part of her board of advisors. But I agree, and I think for me, I think the first thing to do is really is to ask. And whether you go to the doctor's office or your visit with your specialist and say, like, do you have this resource? And, if not, is that something that, you might be able to get? Because physicians do a really good job about asking, pharmacy directors for support that they might need to take care of patients that can lead to better outcomes, right? So that's what you could do, like, individually. On a single grinding space, which I know is so hard. I get it. The other thing I think that I would really like to see is around a lot more sort of legislative efforts and sort of pharmacy activity. And so there are a lot of states that leverage their pharmacist societies to work under a protocol, so allows them to practice a little bit more freely. And then also even with like RDACs, again, like legislative efforts that really help push, having a holistic care team. And I think in the rare disease space, it is key, because the availability of therapeutics, FDA approved or not, is so small that you really need expert eyes all the time. And I think with the pipeline of therapies that are coming out, that everybody in this space is pushing for around gene therapy and ASOs and, repurposing potentially with FDA labeling, which is like these are like, like 20 other podcasts. Those are all things that are niche and, need to be handled in a very deliberate fashion. And so I think as long as you continue to ask, people will start listening and partnering. And it's one thing where I've stepped into this space and I've noticed it. Like I've heard people talk about it and I'm thinking, where are we? Where are the people, the pharmacists? Where is the clinical pharmacist in this? And I'm trying to offer the support that I can with my knowledge, but even I don't, right? It's still digging, but I'm happy to support in any way that I can.
Well, you're spearheading it, I think. I love that you brought up Amber Freed. Obviously, she's the queen of the land, and it doesn't surprise me one bit that she already has a pharmacist on her board. Well, and this might not have anything to do with what we're talking about today, but the drug that she got, Maxwell, yep. Right? In fact, I think was Recidivity? How do you say that? Was that the drug?
Yep, Ravicti, yep.
Okay, so, one of my other favorite kiddos, Lil Camden, who has STXBP1, just got his approved for like, $100,000 a month. But his mom said that his whole life changed, right? Same with Maxwell. Yep. Like all of these improvements, but the drug is so expensive.
Yep.
But it also makes me think like, as patient advocacy groups, or at least certain neurodevelopmental disorders that have a lot of similar findings, maybe we should just be making like a master list of all of the drugs that our kids are on and what they're doing for our kids, and kind of just have them as, I don't know, a cheat sheet for our own sleuthing when we do bring it to our clinicians.
No, I agree. That's actually something Michelle and I have sort of like chatted back and forth in email. And I think she outreached Smith as well, like, because he's, like the king of repurposing and also is like a tech guru. So, like that's kind of things that we've talked about offline as like a repository, right? Because I agree, like the glycerol phenylbutyrate or the Ravicti, seems to have made a splash in many subsets of neurodevelopmental disease. That's just been fascinating for me, like as a pharmacist to think about it. And I think I've heard ketamine, right? Ketamine has also kind of been high on the list of really beneficial drugs across multiple spaces as well. I can't go into cost and approvals, and that's just That's like a nightmare to talk about.
I was just going to say nightmare.
I think those are all like, to me, I do think we need that. I think we need some central repository or website or something where you can kind of go and say like, all right, like here's the gene, right, that we're using it for, here's the drug we're using it for, and here's what we've seen, right, as a benefit. And so it's almost like a repository of single case reports that just isn't, fully published. And I know, you start getting into a lot of sort of political things and INDs and IPs and, all that sort of messiness and insurance and coverage. But, from a global space, we do need that. And it's something I'd love to work towards eventually. I just don't know. I guess, I don't know where to start sometimes.
It makes me think of Catherine Inston, and I'm going to email her after we talk. She's creating a platform called Variant, and it'll have, all of these different rare neurodevelopmental disorders. And I feel like part of that product that she's building has sort of this idea under each disorder. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if it's sort of similar in the idea that maybe we could just kind of use what she's already built. Anyways, side thought.
Great side thought.
I'm going to connect you to her too, actually. Super smart, amazing, gorgeous scientist. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for schooling me a little bit in the role that a clinical pharmacist can play for our families and in the genetic disorder space. I think this is so important. I love the momentum that I think could continue, especially with you speaking up and everybody having a chance to listen to this idea and the importance of it. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have for this particular conversation that we're having? Any advice that you have for families or any kind of directions, like an active takeaway that people should go do now?
I think you've squeezed it all out of me today. But I think the most important thing that you can do is ask, right, when you go to see your physician. And, I know so many of us, when you go with your kiddo, that you don't take no for an answer, but there's also some days where you just don't have it in you, right? You don't have it in you to fight because you fight every single day just to wake up and continue moving on and forward. So I would just say, if you feel like you're not getting anywhere with your physician, just say hey, do you have a clinical pharmacy specialist that I might be able to talk to, or can we just have a follow-up phone visit so I can talk about this, because this is really important to me and important to my kid. And I know that still is a big ask for so many of you out there, but that is, to me, the most important thing that you can do. And I know everybody just continues to fight and grind and move it forward. And I just hope to be a part of making that one iota easier for people, when they're in their journey.
Thanks, Rachel. I know you already have, and I'm so glad you're with Combined Brain, and I look forward to learning more about this, getting to know you better, and seeing where this all goes for our families. So thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate your time and for sharing about your family and your expertise.
Thank you, Effie. I appreciate it.
I hope you've been enjoying this podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this show with your people, and please make sure to rate and review it on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also head over to Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to connect with me and stay updated on the show. If you're interested in sharing your story, or if you have anything you would like to contribute, please submit it to my website at effieparks.com. Thank you so much for listening to the show and for supporting me along the way. I appreciate y'all so much. I don't know what kind of day you're having, but if you need a little pick-me-up, Ford's got you.